Chapter 828. Is this enough? 3. Rumble. Rumble. Everything started to crumble the moment Prince Letvia was defeated. The scene didn't go unnoticed by those beneath, as almost everyone was able to catch a glimpse of what had happened. Did we? The prince. It had all happened so fast that the demons beneath were unable to understand what had happened completely. You traitor. A scream suddenly spread across the sky. Bastard. How dare you betray our race? It was only after they heard an enraged shout in the air that they snapped out of it and focused their attention on a particular demon with long pink hair. It was none other than Prince Valing, who took the scorn and hatred of the demons with a calm expression. Such expressions were the norm for him. There wasn't much that could unsettle someone like him. Beside him was the same hazy figure that killed Prince Letvia. Underneath, on the main floating island, Jean tore his gaze away from Run and looked to his right, where a demoness he was all too familiar with appeared. She was looking at the scene above with an incomparably serious expression. Are you sure about your decision? Amichum. Priscilla nodded her head, tearing her gaze away from the scene and shifting her attention to Jean. It certainly wasn't easy, but a bitter smile spread across her features. We didn't have much of a choice. Thinking back at what had happened a while ago, she could only bitterly shake her head. It truly was not much of a choice from their end. Aside from what had happened with them in Ka-Mank Hut, their positions were awfully obvious within the Sloth clan, and while they didn't dislike their position, they still wanted more. They were ambitious and had always dreamed of reaching a higher position. Since a chance presented itself, they chose to take it. They were not so foolish as to take the risk without first having some evidence to show them that it was a risk that would be worth taking. It was for this very reason that they had demanded that the human show proof before coming to the decision to join his side. The 2 cores belonging to the Pillar Masters. That was enough proof for them to take the gamble and join his side. Now then. She secretly sighed to herself, staring once again at the shadowy figure in the sky. We've placed our bets. We can now only hope that our gamble pays off. You've made a good choice. A voice brought Priscilla out of her thoughts, and when she turned her head, her gaze fell on 2 emerald-colored eyes. Oh, is this your way of comforting me? No. Why would I? Jean took a step back, seemingly almost disgusted by her comment. For a moment, Priscilla thought about all sorts of things, many of which weren't very nice, but she managed to hold herself back. He's my supplier of sticks. I can't ruin our relationship just yet. So long as she managed to get those sticks. On the premise that we're allies, I won't do anything to you but. Glancing at him from the corner of her eye, she extended her hand and opened up her palm. Moving her fingers, she nudged at him. Staring at her hand, Jean stood there blankly, unable to find the right words to say. He was utterly speechless. Has she become an addict? Seemed to be the case. Is it the nicotine? Is that what it is? Frowning, all sorts of thoughts started to cross Jin's mind, and silence reigned over the area they were in. Perhaps nicotine was the key to defeating all of the demons. Various thoughts crossed Jin's mind as plans started to formulate in his mind. Just where am I going to get all that nicotine from? Rumble. His thoughts, however, were broken by the sudden shaking of the pillar as the world around them started to crumble. As the floating islands around them began to collapse, water began to seep into the area beneath them. The ground beneath them began to fracture, and the island began to rock back and forth in the space all around them. What's happening? What's going on? Jean and Priscilla were both confused, and when they looked up, they were shocked to see massive cracks forming all over the cosmic skies of the world. See, crack. Behind the cracks, light filtered through. Once the cracks became larger, an azure-colored sky became more visible to the 2 of them, and soon, everything came crashing down at once. Crash. After hearing a sound that was reminiscent of a glass breaking, the world around them began to disintegrate and they saw only white. Their bodies, which were standing on the island, suddenly lightened, and the 2 of them felt their bodies disappear into thin air. While they weren't completely aware of what was going on, if there was one thing they understood, it was that the Pillar of Sloth had crumbled. The world around me crumbled and returned to how it was supposed to be. Clouds littered the sky and light filtered through from the sun in the sky. What do we do now? It was Amanda's voice that brought me out of my thoughts, and I pondered for a moment before shifting my focus toward the nearest pillar. To the next pillar. Just like that. Is there anything else that we need to do? I only had one goal. Eliminate all of the pillars and absorb all of the Akashic laws from the demons. It wasn't an easy task, but having already dealt with 3 of the pillars, things were starting to become easier. Especially since my strength was increasing. What about those that came out from the pillar? Amanda drew my attention to the ground, and when I turned to look, I saw a number of residual pocket dimensions from which people emerged. As time went on, more and more people emerged into the open, and before long, the entire region was teeming with demonic beings as well as people belonging to the 4 races. Thankfully, at the moment it was just the 2 of us outside. Prince Valing and the other demons weren't out, but I knew that they'd be out soon enough. Observing those that were coming out, I turned to look toward my left, and it was then that I noticed that there were several fights ongoing in the distance. Is this from the other pillars? Indeed, if I thought about it, apart from killing the leaders, I hadn't dealt with the remaining demons. It wasn't that I didn't want to, but I had no time for them. Such a thing was troublesome. Oh wait. It was at that moment that I realized something and turned my head to look at Amanda. She looked back at me and I nodded my head. That might work. What might work? Here. I didn't answer her and extended my hand toward her. Opening up my palm, I focused on the laws within my body and closed my eyes. Visualizing an image inside of my mind, I opened my eyes again and gathered all of the energy toward my palm, where slowly an orb floated. What's this? Just watch. As I kept my attention fixed on the orb I held in my hand, within a very short period of time, its form began to shift and change. My body ached and flickered at the fact that I was using the laws, but I endured the pain and continued to channel it. Eventually, the orb extended into a thin line of moderate thickness. This is. Amanda seemed to finally be getting an idea of what I was making as her eyes opened wide, and I clenched my fist. Done. I managed to mutter through my clenched teeth, bringing my hand toward her and passing over a small translucent white arrow. Wah. Take it. Just take it. Amanda reached out with her hand, and the arrow moved over to her hand and floated on top of it. Her face lit up as a result of the faint glow coming from the arrow in her hand. I would have smiled had it been before, but I was in no mood to smile and nudged her with my head toward the demons in the distance. What are you waiting for? Okay. Getting the hint, Amanda's face turned serious and she brought her bow out. How many can you hit? I'll try to get as many as I can. Just shoot the arrow and let's leave after that. For those that survive, I'm sure our allies can deal with them. The sad reality was that I couldn't save everyone. I could only do my best to help them as much as I could, and this was part of that help. Whether they lived or died. It was something that wasn't within my immediate concern at the moment. Perhaps it would have been previously, but after what I saw, I no longer cared as much. What mattered at the moment was victory. Creak. Amanda's back slowly arched as she placed the arrow on the string, and as she did so, a tremendous amount of power began to radiate from her body. Her sudden burst of power attracted the attention of the demons that were coming out from below, but it was too late. Right when the string of her bow touched the corner of her mouth, Amanda let go of the string and the arrow disappeared from the bow. The sky above tore, and all of a sudden the surroundings turned quiet. When I turned my head to look around me, I was met with over a dozen demons. They had probably just noticed us after coming out of the pocket dimension, and all of them were of the prince and duke rank. The power they radiated was extremely powerful, but it suddenly started to rain. Chapter 829 Pillar of Greed. I don't see anything. The mist is far too thick. Ryan muttered as he extended his hand, where a small device gently floated back into the palm of his hand. The device was compact, roughly the size of a Rubik's Cube, and it featured complex circuitry all around its body. I've tried using the heat sensor in the drone, but that also doesn't seem to work. The fog seems to be hiding everything that is inside. What about sounds? An older voice echoed. It belonged to Leopold, who was standing beside him with a pack of gum in his hands. Bringing his hand toward his mouth, he started chewing on the gums. The drones look for any sounds that are coming from beneath. Munch. That would probably do the trick. I've tried. Ryan shook his head. It blocks everything. From sunlight to all electromagnetic waves and sounds. We're on our own. Well, that sucks. Leopold muttered, leaning back against one of the rocks behind him. He wasn't in a very good mood at the moment. Suddenly transported in such a world, he was lucky to have found Ryan close to him, but the same thing couldn't be said for his daughter, for whom he had no idea where she was. I hope she's okay. Such thoughts crossed his mind as he gazed ahead, where he saw a young girl standing, waving her hand at him. She looked exactly like his daughter but was merely an illusion. Dad, what are you doing over there? Hurry up. He sounded just like her too. I'm glad Ryan's with me. He could only shudder at the thought of what would have happened had Ryan not been here with him. It was thanks to him that he was able to realize that it was all an illusion, and if not for him he would have probably fallen into whatever trap was being laid out. Right now he could only hope that she was fine, even if he knew that the situation they were in was rather dire. So, what do we do now? Leopold asked, raising his head slightly to look at Ryan, who seemed to be in deep thought. And indeed he was, as he looked through his devices and eventually settled for a small flag. What's that? Wait. Moving around the flag, Ryan touched the pole and it suddenly started to flutter. Almost immediately after that, the mist that had been surrounding them began to recede, even if only very slightly. I guess that works. A smile finally appeared on Ryan's face as he picked up the flag. Moving toward Leopold, he waved it at him. Come closer to me. So long as you're close to the flag, you won't have to worry about the fog around us. This should make our lives a lot easier. You're right. Leopold sighed in relief and moved toward where Ryan was. As soon as he came within range of the flag, the image of his daughter vanished, and he let out a sigh of relief. It was starting to get to him. It looks like you were right. Of course I am. Ryan rolled his eyes. Who do you think I am? Cocky, aren't we? And rightfully so. Fair enough. Just then Leopold stopped speaking, and so did Ryan, whose smile disappeared from his face. The two of them sharply looked around them, and it wasn't long before they heard faint rustling sounds coming from the area around them. Rustle I. Rustle I. Immediately, over 10 black figures appeared around them and surrounded them. Both Ryan and Leopold's faces fell in response to what they saw, and Leopold spit out the gums that he had been chewing on. Ooh. Well, fuck. Her vision was obscured, and the only thing she could hear was the rhythmical sound of her footsteps crunching against the sole beneath her feet. What's going on? Emma wondered, looking around her and spotting the large, crooked trees around her. She had a very difficult time seeing because of the mist that blanketed everything around her, and she could only see a couple of meters in front of her at most. It had been quite a while since she appeared here, and despite the time she spent, she still hadn't figured out what was going on. Where am I supposed to go? Before continuing forward, she slashed with her short sword, leaving a faint mark on one of the trees beside her. I'm back. It wasn't until she realized that she had returned to the same spot as before that she finally came to a stop. The most convincing piece of evidence for that was the cut on the tree that was beside her. Frustrated, she stomped her foot on the ground. Damn it! What is this plaque? She never got to finish that sentence. Just as she was about to finish it, her pupils constricted and her back bent backward. Swoosh. A black claw appeared in the area she previously was in, and in one swift movement, Emma juggled her short swords in her hand and crossed them right on the demon's head that had appeared out of nowhere. I got you. A smile crept up on her face as she looked at the demon above her. Finally, after who knows how long, she managed to trick the demon into coming out. Ever since she arrived at the spot, she had the distinct impression that someone was following her around and watching her every movement. It was faint, but she believed that her hunch was correct. Since she wasn't certain of where they were because of the fog, she decided to play along and lure them to her. It was a risky move, but one that paid out massively. If you answer my questions, I won't kill you. Her words were so icy that they sent shivers down the back of the demon, which slowly nodded its head in response. Good. Emma brought the short swords closer to the demon's neck. A faint pulse indicated that the core was right next to the blade of her short sword. One movement from her and the demon would die. Where am I? What is this pillar of greed? How do I get out? Get out. The demon all of a sudden froze before turning its head toward Emma. You want to get out? Isn't that obvious? Frowning, Emma brought the ends of her short swords even closer to the demon's neck, and a faint black line appeared on the demon's neck. Coo! Emma was taken aback when all of a sudden, the demon's body began to tremble and it broke out in an uncontrollable fit of laughter. You want to get out? Quahaha. What's so funny? She pressed her short swords even more deeply into the demon's neck, but it did not stop laughing. In fact, the demon found the situation to be even more amusing. Just as Emma was about to kill the demon stopped and turned to look at Emma. There is no escaping from the pillar of greed. From the moment you stepped in, you've become our prey. The only escape for you is through spurt. A head rolled under Emma's feet, and the body soon disappeared into thin air. Having dealt with the core, the demon died instantly. That was a waste of time. It was disappointing to know that her efforts to bait the demon were for naught. Well, not entirely. A hunting ground for demons, huh? That was the only thing she managed to make out of the conservation. Wasn't very much, but she understood a bit more about the situation. It looks like I'm not the only one here. That was great news for her. She had originally thought she was alone, but from the looks of things it wasn't the case. Good, if I can find someone that I know, then the chances of surviving are higher. 2 is always better than 1, or at least for her. Turning her head to look left and right, she pressed her foot against the ground and darted off into the distance. With a goal in mind, she knew exactly what she needed to do. The world within the Pillar of Greed was vast. Emma didn't know for how long she ran, but as she moved around the fog in hopes of finding a clearer patch of land, she ended up stumbling into what seemed to be a large waterfall. Splash! Splash! With the fog covering her vision, she couldn't see it properly, but she could hear it all right. It was unquestionably a waterfall due to the extremely loud sound of water being thrown back and forth in the distance. From the sound, it didn't seem too far from her. Without a second thought, she headed for it. The waterfall can serve as a good checking point given the fog. With no sight, the only thing they could rely on was hearing, and the waterfall was the perfect stop. Therefore, she didn't hesitate and just ran for the waterfall. However, what she saw when she was close to the waterfall astounded her. An enormous skull was carved into the rock face of a mountain of considerable size. Its mouth was wide open, displaying its numerous large teeth, and murky red water dripped from its exposed mouth, heading toward what appeared to be a bottomless pit. What in the... The sight left Emma utterly speechless, as she didn't know what to do at the moment. What is this place? She truly couldn't fathom what it was, and just as she was having second thoughts, a hand pressed against her shoulder, and a voice that felt familiar to her echoed in her ears. Go. Huh. Emma's head slowly turned, and her gaze interlocked with a man with black hair and crimson-red eyes. He looked incredibly handsome, and when her gaze met his, she felt her heart stop for a reason. For some reason. He seemed familiar to her, strangely so, and yet her mind blanked whenever she tried to recall his face. She couldn't. No matter how hard she tried. Her mouth trembled. Who are you? Chapter 830 Pillar of Greed. Emma couldn't explain it in words, but the moment her gaze fell on the man that stood behind her, she found herself unable to speak. It was as if something was stuck at her throat, preventing her from speaking, and the empty feeling that she had been feeling for quite some time suddenly started to resurface once again. It drained her completely. Why, you? Who are you? She stumbled several steps back, staring at the smiling figure that seemed all too familiar to her, yet at the same time distant. No matter how hard she tried, she couldn't recall him at all. It was just blank. Her mind was completely blank. Just what is happening? Who is he? Why do I feel this way? Her mind was a total mess and she could barely think properly. The more she glanced at the figure, the more her mind became a mess and she continued to step back. It wasn't out of fear but due to the weird feeling that was eating at her chest. Ha. Something trickled down the side of her cheeks as she held onto her head with both hands. Emma, calm down. It's me. Don't. He tried to reach out for her, but he was quickly stopped by Emma, who slapped his hand away from her. She glared at him fiercely. Don't take a single step toward me. Stay where you are. At this point she was at the point where she was practically screaming, and the pain in her head was starting to grow worse. She didn't know what was going on at that moment, but sudden images started to flash within her mind, and her head started to throb even more fiercely. Her hand reached for her shirt and she gripped it tightly. Just what is happening? The longer the situation dragged on, the more she found herself wavering. No. Clenching her teeth, Emma gripped her short swords at her hips and in one swift motion, pointed them toward the man that was standing opposite her. Mana started to flow out of her body as power started to radiate from her. Glancing at the fog that was surrounding her, she had a sudden idea. I get it now. It was the only explanation that she could think of at the moment. That was the only thing that could explain her sudden panic attack in reaction to the unfamiliar man that she had never seen before in her life. You must be a manifestation of whatever this fog is. She didn't speak further after that. With both short swords in hand, she pressed her foot against the ground, and her figure appeared before the man. He was quick. It took no time for her to arrive before him, and she slashed with her short swords. Swoosh. A pity that her weapon completely passed through the man who kept smiling at her. I knew it. Emma shouted, feeling relieved that her swords had passed through the man. Without a doubt, it proved her assumption and she managed to calm down. It's an illusion. She reassured herself. Yet for some reason deep down she felt a little disappointed at the thought. Why did you swing at me? Let's relax for a second, he said while looking down at her, his smile looking extremely sincere. It was such a gaze that made the empty feeling in Emma's heart grow, and she clenched her teeth. Shut up, she shouted, swinging her other short sword. Even though he was only a projection, the very fact that he was there unnerved her. He had to disappear. For her own sake. Swoosh. Yet again it passed through his body, but Emma didn't care. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. One swing after another she kept on swinging. Her attacks would keep passing through his body, and he seemed relatively unharmed by whatever she was doing, but Emma just couldn't stop herself. She needed to vent at the moment, and each of her swings started to become progressively faster and stronger. Boom. So much so that the land beneath them tore apart, and the fog moved away for a brief moment. The thing that prompted Emma to stop was the fact that the figure remained where it was despite the disappearance of the fog, and her feet came to a sudden halt. Haa. Her breath was extremely labored and sweat trickled down the side of her face, but her gaze never wavered away from the figure as she continued to look at him. Why? Who are you? There were many things that she wanted to ask at that moment, but that was all she could manage to utter. She didn't know what to do at the moment, and all she could do was stare at him. Stare at him in hopes of him knowing something. Something that could explain the emptiness that she had been feeling for the past few years. She had believed that she had been able to subdue it, but at this very moment, it re-emerged more powerfully than it had ever been, and she desired nothing more than to understand why this was the case. Just what was this emptiness and why did it grow stronger at the sight of him? My name is Kevin. It was just a name. A simple name. The moment he uttered those words, as if something within her snapped, a flood of memories started to resurface within her mind, and her mind blanked entirely for a moment. Thud. She soon fell to her knees and a blank look appeared on her face. How? Her words were incomprehensible, and she appeared to have a look on her face that suggested she had just seen a ghost. Her mind. It wasn't in the right state as she kept repeating herself. Evan? How? Memories continued to flood her mind, and something within her seemed to come close to snapping. Swoosh. It was right then that Kevin appeared right behind her. She didn't seem to notice him as her face remained blank, seemingly completely lost. Who would have thought? Kevin's voice suddenly changed to a raspy one, and his figure started to fade, revealing the features of an elderly demon with a long white goatee and a tuxedo. The cane, which he held in his right hand and used to assist him in maintaining his balance, sank into the earth beneath. His gaze was currently drawn toward Emma, and his eyes flashed with interest. Who would have thought? He muttered, his voice as soft as a whisper. Who would have thought that her body contained traces of the power that His Majesty had given me? While handing over the body of a young human girl with brown hair that reached her shoulders, Prince Saul Bacon issued an order to one of the demons that stood next to him. Take special care of her. Understood. A lanky demon came up behind the prince and grabbed the girl out of his hands before whisking her away from his line of sight. Staring at her figure, the prince's head cocked a little. I need to report this to His Majesty later. The fact that she had traces of the power that His Majesty had given him was a cause for concern. It wasn't exactly powerful, but there were traces of it, and that was also when he realized that her memories had been tampered with. He wasn't too sure who was responsible for the seal, but what concerned him the most was the power that was used to seal her memories. From what he could tell, the individual who had been responsible for placing the seal on her body was extremely strong. Perhaps even stronger than him, but even knowing that, the prince wasn't scared. I too can control the powers. With his hands behind his back, the prince set his cane to the side and moved forward. But. His calm steps echoed within the cave, and after walking for a couple of minutes, he stood by the edge of a large opening. With a bright light in the distance, he moved forward and he was able to see what lay beyond the light. Not bad. A smile appeared on his face the moment he was able to see what was going on as he stood above a large cave opening. What attracted his attention was the large rune in the middle of the cavern that emitted a bright red light, and several people had been strategically positioned within the rune at various points. They were sitting in a cross-legged position, and their entire bodies had a husky appearance, as if they had been sucked out of everything in their bodies. Over here. Place them over here. We've captured another one. Through an opening beneath the cave, demons continued to move forward. They carried humans, orcs, elves, and dwarves and replaced them on the large rune in the middle of the cave that glowed brighter with each passing second. It looks like everything is proceeding smoothly. The prince was more than satisfied with what he was seeing. If there was a reason why he wasn't scared of the entity responsible for placing a seal on the human girl, it was because of the rune in the middle. So long as he managed to absorb the power that was building up within it, he feared no one. Not even his majesty. That was, of course, on the premise that he was within the pillar and had a grudge against his majesty, which he didn't. He held nothing but respect and admiration for him. Good. Nodding to himself a couple of times, the prince tore his gaze away from the rune and made his way back to where he came from. He had seen enough. It should take no longer than a couple of hours at most. By then, he couldn't stop himself from smiling at that point. Chapter 831 Beg Me. The color blue dominated the world within the Pillar of Pride. A hazy, dark blue mist covered the entire landscape, with small peaks sprouting from beneath the mist. The world seemed tranquil, but within the blue mist, all sorts of colorful lights flashed from within. They carried different hues and they flashed continuously. It wasn't until the mist suddenly split apart to reveal several figures that the tranquility that lay within the world broke apart. Arf! A loud shout reverberated through the air, and a powerful wave of mana burst forth from Octavius's hand. It directly shot toward a demon in front of him, and shortly after, the demon's figure disintegrated into nothing. Silence returned to the world after that, and just as Octavius felt himself relax, an urgent voice rang from behind him. Behind you. Boom. He didn't have enough time to react, and before he knew it, a powerful force blasted past his back, and he found himself hurling forward, eventually crashing against the hard ground beneath. Octavius groaned in pain, using both hands to help himself up. Shying. He could hear the sound of fighting behind him and he just barely stopped himself from collapsing again. The force of the impact was a lot stronger than he had anticipated. I'm glad Gervis is with me. Who would have thought he'd have such thoughts? While he wasn't the same Octavius as in the past, he remembered everything that had happened in the past and didn't think he would work well with Gervis. He was wrong. Oi. Are you helping me or not? Gervis's voice broke him out of his thoughts, and Octavius disappeared from the spot, reappearing right in front of another demon. With his fist clenched, he threw a fist in the demon's direction, and a powerful blast reverberated through the air. Boom. The demon's body hurled back several meters after the contact, and Octavius moved to where Gervis was. Shying. Wearing his armor, Gervis was currently dealing with two prince-ranked demons at once, and even though he seemed to be having a hard time, Octavius could tell he wasn't disadvantaged in the least. With his large gun-like device and powerful shield that activated whenever a demon appeared, he wasn't prone to sneak attacks, making things a lot easier for him. His maneuverability was a bit questionable, but it wasn't anything to be worried about, considering the defensive mechanism installed in his suit. Boom. Arriving before one of the demons hounding Gervis, Octavius thrust his fist forward, and just by a few inches he managed to hit the demon in the abdominal area. Yuck. Sensing the demon scattering away with an agonized scream, Octavius retrieved his fist. Octavius! At the same time, the demon crumbled into dust, Gervis' eyes sharpened, and the ray gun in his hand flickered with a green light as a powerful wave of mana sprouted in the air. It was a process that took several seconds, and under normal circumstances, it would have been difficult to pull off this move. However, he wasn't alone in this endeavor. Clank. Clank. With Octavius helping him, Gervis had no trouble gathering up the mana required to charge the weapon, and his weapon flickered even more wildly as a large hue enveloped the area they were in. The residual mana coming out of the gun killed all the weaker demons around them, leaving behind only the powerful ones who warily stared at Gervis's weapon. Many tried to interfere with his gathering process, but with Octavius next to him, it was of no use. Now! Gervis shouted, and Octavius disappeared from where he was. Whing! Almost immediately after that, an enormously powerful beam shot out of the gun in the direction of the demon, who was unable to react in time and was struck head-on as a result. Surprisingly or unsurprisingly, the attack passed through every demon that it had a chance of meeting, and wherever it passed, it left nothing behind. This included the mist that parted along the path of the beam, finally revealing what looked to be a forest with trees that seemed to tower in the hundreds of meters. There were some demons that managed to dodge, but they were in the minority as most of them died instantly from the beam. Shit. Seeing that he hadn't killed all of the demons, Gervis cursed and reloaded his weapon before hastily pointing it toward his right side. He felt something dangerous coming from there. Whing. Unfortunately, his attack missed completely. Careful. Right as he was getting ready to reload his gun again, a loud shout echoed behind him, and that was when Octavius appeared. Boom. A powerful force erupted from behind Gervis as Octavius's fist clashed against another first, and circular pressurized wind rings spread from the point of contact between the two attacks. Ugh. The wind was so powerful that Gervis was forced to take several steps back. When he finally managed to stabilize himself, he was surprised to see Octavius standing before him with a rough breath. Ha ha ha. That. In spite of his labored breathing, he appeared to be completely unharmed, which was not the case for the demon, who looked exhausted. Gervis wasn't one to waste time. Since the opportunity presented itself, he didn't waste a single second and pointed his gun toward the demon in front of him. His movements were swift, and pressing the trigger, a beam composed of mana shot directly toward the demon, who was only barely able to dodge the attack. Spurt. Still, it did manage to graze the demon, and that was all that Octavius needed. After materializing behind the demon, he pressed his hand against the creature's back and directed all of his mana into its back. Whoom. A terrifying wave of mana swept across the surroundings, and the demon's body vanished into thin air, leaving behind a dark core in the air. Without hesitation, Octavius reached out for the core. He had just firmly grasped it in his hand when all of a sudden he felt a subtle breeze and his entire body lightened. Swoosh. I'll have to ask you to stop. He's a rather dear subordinate of mine. I wouldn't want him to die such a pathetic death. A voice that seemed to harmonize with the surroundings suddenly echoed, and Octavius's entire body stiffened on the spot. What happened? Why can't I move? It was much to his horror that Octavius realized that he couldn't move a single finger of his body. I'll be taking this. His heart dropped the moment he felt his hand lighten up, but at the same time he was able to catch a glimpse of what the one responsible looked like, and his expression hardened. The first thing that hit him was the overwhelming presence he gave out. Standing before him, Octavius was reminded of his helpless days with the Protectors and how strong they were. He had always thought that the only one who could ever reach the same level as the Protectors was the Demon King, but it seemed like he had made a grave mistake. The demon that stood before his very eyes was one such existence, and despair filled every inch of Octavius's body. All of a sudden, a black hue sprouted out from the demon, and the core in its hands started to shake. Shortly thereafter, the core jumped out of its hands and a demon materialized from it. I apologize for my incompetence, Prince Andrea. The demon apologized with their head lowered. One could tell from the tone of their voice that they truly felt remorseful about the situation. You were indeed quite incompetent. Prince Andrea nodded his head. He indeed found his subordinate to be quite incompetent. The fact that they had almost died at the hands of two inferior creatures. I'll deal with you later, we have more important things at hand. Prince Andrea turned his head to stare at Gervas and Octavius. Under his direct scrutiny, the two of them suddenly found themselves unable to breathe as a terrifying pressure bore down on them from all sides. Quite the prideful duo. Not bad. A strange praise, and the prince's mouth curled, if ever so slightly. I'll make it quick then. He extended his hand to reveal 2 contracts that floated atop of his palm. Sign this and join my side. How about it? The way the prince worded his words made it seem as though they had a choice, but Gervas and Octavius both knew that they had no such option. Either they accepted or they died. Heh. In the end, Gervas laughed. You said it best not long ago, right? He turned to look at Octavius, who turned his head to meet his gaze. If you're nowhere prideful, you should already be aware of our answers, right, Octavius? Opening his mouth, Octavius looked at the contract in the prince's hand and Gervas. He eventually closed his mouth and smiled. Your rig. Bang. Octavius never got to finish his words. Rigged as he was about to finish his sentence, a terrifying power erupted from the area beneath him and clamped at the back of his neck. Octavius. The sudden situation startled Gervas, who quickly drew his weapon, but it was a tad too late. Before Gervas could even fire his weapon, Octavius found his body hurling toward Prince Adrian's direction, and a fist soon came into contact with his chest. Bang. Walk. It was a pain unlike any other, and Octavius felt his chest cave in at the force of the impact. If that wasn't bad enough, the prince's grip on his neck didn't loosen, and a knee came hurling at his abdominal area, hitting him cleanly there. Bang. Ack. Spit and what seemed to be blood spilled out of his mouth as his back hunched. For a moment he felt his heart stop and his vision blur. Whing. Thankfully, just as things were starting to get worse, a powerful force erupted from above, and he felt the grip over the back of his neck loosen, and his body hurl toward the ground beneath. Boom. Crashing against the ground beneath him, the corner of his eyes started to darken, and so did his consciousness, which was on the verge of slipping. The last thing he heard was the sound of a couple of soft footsteps that stopped right before him. Beg me. Chapter 832. Beg me. When you're going through a lot in your childhood and it seems like everything is against you, you're bound to think negatively of everything. If that was how one would summarize Melissa's life in a nutshell, it'd be that. Melissa's childhood was completely devoid of any meaningful experiences, in contrast to the experiences of other children who were able to see their parents every day, eat with them every day and play with them every day. Her world was nothing but bleak, and eventually, it morphed her into who she was today. A negative person. Everything that she came across, she viewed in a negative manner, and she couldn't help herself. The only thing she cared about was herself, as that was the only person she trusted. She had been alone throughout a major part of her life. Who else could she trust but herself? It was just how she was, and she had come to terms with her personality. At this moment, staring at the figure that lay before her very eyes, her expression was complicated. It was the first time that she had seen him in this state. She had dreamed of this very moment many times. She frequently daydreamed about the time when she would be able to look down on her father, pleading for her help while he was laying on the ground beneath her. The situation. It was just like in her dreams except for one part. What are you waiting for? Melissa said coldly, her eyes paused on her father's figure. She wasn't sure why exactly she was acting the way that she was, but that was of no concern to her at the moment. Her mind was clear. Ask for my help. Beg me and I'll consider it. Her tone was cold and at the same time, carried a certain arrogance to it. She wanted nothing more than to have this man beg in front of her. Nothing would satisfy her more than seeing him grovel before her with his head bowed and pleading for something. Anything. Finally, she could show him that she was just fine without him. Why aren't you saying anything? Do you not want to live? He remained silent and merely looked at her without saying anything else. His eyes were clear as he sat there with his back propped up against a tree. Come on. What are you waiting for? Beg me. As Melissa's mind became increasingly obscured by a particular sensation that penetrated deeper and deeper into her bones, so did her voice, which became increasingly agitated. Tell me that you want my help and I'll gladly help you. At this very moment, Melissa was venting all of the animosity that she had built up over the years toward her father. for treating her like the shit that she was and neglecting her for the shit that she was. She desired the sense of accomplishment that would come from seeing the man groveling at her feet after everything that he had done to her. She needed that satisfaction. Nevertheless, she still found herself sneakily retrieving her potions from her dimensional storage space. She wasn't so self-centered that she'd kill the one and only chance they had of getting out of this place, despite the fact that she wanted to make the man in front of her beg as badly as she could. Whatever was eating up her mind, it didn't completely destroy her rationality. Just as she was about to hand out the potions, she was stopped by him. "No, I don't need it." "What?" When she looked at him, Melissa's mouth suddenly went dry. For some reason, she couldn't help herself from saying anything as he slowly stood up, albeit weakly. "Ugh." He seemed to be struggling quite a lot, but for some reason he stubbornly forced himself to stand. "Let me." "No." Melissa offered to help, but she flat out refused. This pissed her off, but in the end she remained quiet. His gaze made it hard for her to say anything. Her mouth would go dry whenever she tried to speak. "What is it? What are you trying to do?" She eventually managed to ask, her arms crossed in front of her. From the corner of her eyes she could see lights flashing above, and thus she didn't understand why he was still wasting her time with her. Thump. Huh. What happened next utterly stumped her as her entire body stiffened. What are you doing?" Melissa was left completely flustered for the very first time in a very long time as she fumbled her way through finding the right words to say. But when she turned her head, she soon stopped struggling. With his head resting against her shoulder, Octavius stared right at her. He looked in utter peace at the moment, and for the first time in a very long time she felt true emotions in his eyes. Before she could open her mouth to say anything, Octavius closed his eyes and his figure disappeared. "As much as you think I didn't, I've always been proud of what you've achieved, even when it looked like I didn't care." His words were like lightning bolts to Melissa's ears as her figure froze on the spot. When she snapped out of it, she realized he was long gone and her head snapped upwards. "Hey, wait." Melissa tried to call out for him, but it was already too late. A bright light flashed in the sky and the battle above became even more intense. Boom. Ark, shit. As Gervis slammed violently against the ground, he let out a loud curse. The force of the impact made his entire body hurt, and he had a hard time breathing as a result of how badly he had been knocked around. Cough, cough. Coughing several times, he looked up at the sky and his expression changed. When the figure of a demon slowly descended from above, he felt a dryness in his throat. I thought I was strong, but..." Gervis, who stood atop the dwarven realm, experienced an overwhelming sense of helplessness as he stared at Prince Andrea from below. He was just at a level he could never hope to achieve in his entire life. What made him despair even further was the thought that there were 6 more monsters just like him roaming across the world. They truly are monsters amongst monsters. The feeling just one gave him was one of utter despair, and he could only look up with indignity. Such was the gap between them. "What do you say about joining me?" the prince once again offered. An offer that Gervis had already spat on before and one he'd spit on again. "I'm good." Forcing himself up, Gervis loaded his weapon and fired right at Prince Adrian. The force of the attack made the air around it twist and an explosion rang in the air. Bang! The blow struck the prince directly in the middle of his body, and a colorful blue cloud began to billow into the air above. It came as a result of the residual mana from the attack. Did I get him?" Gervis muttered in hope, staring at the blue cloud that started to settle down. "Ah." Gervis's expression froze moments later. Impossible." It came as a great shock to him when the residual mana was finally gone and he realized that the prince was, in fact, still alive, and the fact that the prince seemed to have suffered little to no harm from his attack only made the situation more terrifying for Gervis, who struggled to keep himself composed. That wasn't too bad. Overhearing the demon's words from above, Gervis felt his skin grow cold. They sounded like soft and enticing whispers that crept right into his mind, affecting his composure. Was that the best you could do? Swoosh. He had no idea when the prince materialized in front of him, but all it took was a single blink of his eyelids to find him standing before him. "You." Gervis was quick to react and attempted to quickly pull his gun and aim it at the prince, but just as he touched his weapon, a hand came pressing upon it from above. At. A long, slender hand grasped Gervis's weapon, and as its fingers gently coiled around it, he was unable to move it at all. Let's not get ahead of ourselves here. Why the struggle when you know fully well that you can't even beat me? The prince's words continued to echo within Gervis's mind, almost as if trying to tempt him into giving up. On multiple occasions, Gervis found himself almost giving in to the temptations, but through sheer power he was able to stop himself from falling for them. Ho ho! Such tenacity astounded the prince, who found him even more pleasing to the eyes. Such pride. Ah, I really am starting to like you. Indeed, the more Gervis struggled, the more Prince Andrea found him pleasing to the eyes. If before he was merely testing the waters, he was now sure. He wanted him on his side. What's the point in struggling? Just sign the contract and join my side. Don't throw away your life like they. Pooh. Halfway through his sentence, the prince felt something wet smack against the side of his cheek, and his entire expression froze. Raising his hand and wiping at his cheek, his expression morphed dramatically, and when he looked down at Gervis, who was looking at him with a smile, power started to flood out of his body as he found himself unable to hold back anymore. This is a little gesture I learned from the humans. Especially when Gervis raised his hand and threw a middle finger at him. Fuck you. Fine then. Yuka. Grabbing Gervis by the throat, the prince raised his hand and exposed his sharp nails toward it. Swoosh. Just as his nails were about to pierce Gervis's throat, he felt something from behind him, and when he turned he was surprised to see a certain figure. It was the human from before. Aren't you the human from before? You didn't run away. That surprised him a little. Another good seedling. Are you here to save your little friend? Walk. His grip on Gervis's throat tightened and Gervis groaned. Unexpectedly, however, just as he was about to open his mouth again, the human spoke. I wish to sign the contract with you. Chapter 833. Beg me 3. As much as you think I didn't, I've always been proud of what you've achieved, even when it looked like I didn't care. There was truth in the words he said to her. It may not have looked like it, but he had always been proud of what she had achieved. He may not have shown it because of his circumstances, but he was proud. He had always been. The feeling only grew stronger when he could feel himself again. He couldn't have been more pleased with her accomplishments, and the fact that she handled everything on her own made him even prouder. He was glad she was doing well. Well, for the most part. He knew that he couldn't go back in time and undo the harm that his neglect had caused her. When he thought about her past and how his actions had harmed her, he felt an overwhelming sense of guilt wash over him. She had been through a lot in her life, especially for someone her age. Growing up without a family, she must have truly been lonely. He had never sought forgiveness or expected to receive it. It stung, and now that he knew how to feel emotions again, his life was filled with nothing but pain. Strangely enough, he didn't hate it. Compared to the times when he felt nothing but numbness, this was much better. He at least felt something. It hurt, but at the same time he felt better than ever. His mind had never been clearer, and staring at the prince before him, he had already made up his mind. When he looked down, he could still see her looking up at him from below, and he found himself smiling. Yeah, this is how it should be. Aren't you the human from before? You didn't run away. The prince seemed rather surprised by his sudden appearance. Gervis too, but for another reason. What are you doing? The way Gervis looked at him changed, but Octavius paid him no mind and continued to gaze at Prince Adrian. I would like to make a contract with you. The glare that Gervis was casting became even more intense, but the prince stopped him from saying anything by waving his hand at him and smacking him toward the ground. Bang! He then proceeded to look at Octavius. So you'd like to form a contract with me, huh? Prince Adrian studied Octavius from top to bottom. At first glance he wasn't too bad. A tad bit worse than the dwarf, but overall he wasn't too bad. To have reached his rank while being a human was a testament to his talent and his gaze. He quite liked it. Prince Andrian extended his hand where a contract appeared. Very well, since you're interested in signing a contract, I won't stop you. He offered it without much thought. He was good enough to join his side. Thank you. Octavius nodded his head, staring at the contract in front of him. Don't you dare. From the side he could hear Gervis's muffled words, but he paid no attention to them and grabbed the contract in front of him. It erupted with demonic energy as soon as his hand touched it, engulfing him from head to toe. Despite the fact that he had not yet signed the contract, he was already able to sense the force that emanated from it. It was very powerful. More powerful than he could have ever conceived of being. Go on, sign it. The prince's words echoed close to him, sounding like soft whispers and tempting him even further. Octavius fixed his eyes on the contract in front of him for a moment before putting it down and turning his attention to Prince Adrian. He smiled softly at him. Ryip. And with one swift movement he tore the contract in half, completely freezing the atmosphere. The prince's expression froze with the atmosphere, and he looked at Octavius in utter bafflement. That was when Octavius chose to speak. I didn't say I wanted to sign the contract because I wanted to sign the contract. I only said it because I wanted to get close enough to you to do this. Octavius extended his hand and revealed a white orb. Golden runes emanated from the orb as they rotated like satellites around it in a clockwise motion. Wait, that power. The prince's expression changed drastically the moment the orb appeared, and Octavius smiled. Yes. It's exactly what you think it is. Crack. After he shattered the orb that he was holding in his hand, the entire world became white and golden runes flooded their surroundings, completely enveloping the prince in their entirety. Wait. How is this possible? Although the prince attempted to put up a fight as his own golden runes emerged from his body, his efforts were fruitless. The golden runes whirled around him at a speed that was even greater than the one he was starting to produce, and they wrapped themselves tightly all over his body. How to mhmh. His entire figure froze on the spot and the surroundings turned quiet from that point on. The golden runes kept wrapping and circling around his body, stopping him from doing anything. Still, if one paid close attention, the golden runes around his body dimmed considerably with each passing second. It was clear that even though the prince was trapped, his predicament would not last for very long. Phew. As soon as Octavius used the orb, his entire body began to shrink and he had a hard time maintaining his balance. From a man who was in the prime of his life, he slowly turned into a frail and old man. Such was the consequence of using the laws that didn't belong to you. But that didn't matter to Octavius as he weakly moved toward the prince. He weakly placed his hand over the prince's shoulder and looked down. That was when his gaze paused on a certain girl who was looking back at him. He smiled at her. This is how it should be. He had been a terrible father then and a terrible father now. Perhaps he was never meant to be a father to begin with. Or perhaps he just wasn't ready to be one. So, staring at Melissa for one last time, Octavius really did see her figure overlap with someone he used to know, and something trickled down the side of his cheek. They truly are alike. It was too bad Melissa had never gotten to meet her. His vision warped with images of them as a happy family. As a family that they never were, and the thought ached him even more. Crack. Octavius was deep in thought when he was startled out of his musings by a loud cracking sound. When he looked up, he saw that the golden runes that had encircled the prince were beginning to disintegrate, which meant that the prince would soon be free once more. Realizing that he didn't have much time left, he looked at Melissa once more, engraving her face into his mind before silently nodding at her. Goodbye. I love you. He was only able to utter the first word. He found himself unable to say the last three. He didn't feel like he had the right to say such words to her, and shortly after that the world turned completely dark. Not before hearing the sound of his own body exploding. Boom. Earth. Kill. Charge out and kill all those bastards. As the demons charged out from the pocket spaces that remained over the broken pillars, the sky darkened and a sound like thunder rumbled through the air. Rumble. Rumble. Arc. Awk. Show. 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 Suddenly, a shower of arrows began to rain down from the skies, striking the demonic horde with deadly precision. Each arrow contained a certain golden rune, and their tips glimmered with an otherworldly light. The demons howled in fury as they were struck down one by one, but their numbers seemed endless. Even as the arrows continued to rain down upon them, the demons fought on, driven by their large numbers and their hunger for victory. The members of the Alliance who were standing on the ground looked up in awe and wonder at the incredible scene that was playing out in front of their eyes. When they saw how the arrows were bending away from them, They realized that they didn't have to worry about getting hit by them as they charged forward in the battle. Charge. Attack the demons. All of this unfolded right before my very eyes as I turned to look at Amanda next to me. Her complexion was extremely pale and sweat trickled down her forehead. Are you all right? No. Amanda shook her head at my question. She began to show signs of aging right in front of my very eyes not long after that, but as soon as I pressed my hand against her shoulder, she was able to quickly return to her normal self. Such was the toll that the laws took on the human body. Coating her body with the laws, her complexion gradually returned to normal. What was that power? Amanda wondered, looking at me from the side. I was just about to answer her when I suddenly felt something and turned to look toward a distant pillar. A faint projection appeared in front of me. It was soul linkage, and there I was able to get an idea of what had happened in that pillar. He really did it, huh? I closed my eyes for a moment. With Melissa being one of the people I put the link on, I knew exactly why he did what he did. It was because she was there. I was somewhat prepared for what was to come because I was the one who gave him a small portion of the laws. It was back during the time when everyone was about to migrate to Amora, and he came to me asking for them. I knew in that instant what exactly he was planning, but I didn't stop him. The decision he took was one he had taken long before this day, and had only now put into action. I didn't really know how to feel at the moment. What happened? Well, I have to go. The opportunity presented itself and I knew that I had to move. I opened my eyes again and looked at Amanda. When I looked at her, I had a sudden thought and I found myself frowning at the thought. It was a dangerous idea, but what if?